Hello my dear friends, you're in the Minister of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 19th of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the statements that were made by the Trump during the previous 24 hours. There were like two parts of statements. The first part of statement was made early in the morning of Ukrainian time before Zelensky's activities, and the second part of statements were made several hours ago, also in the evening of Ukrainian time, after Zelensky made his own move. Let's discuss in details, and let's discuss with the first part. Donald Trump made a number of statements. He is disappointed with Ukraine's position in the context of the war with Russia. They had 3 years to sit down at the negotiating table. The war in Ukraine could have been resolved without territorial losses a few years ago. He supported the need to hold elections in Ukraine. Ukraine needs elections if it wants a place at the negotiating table. Zelensky is approved by the people by only 4%. Zelensky does not know where half of the money the US gave is. Ukraine will have to pay or find out where the money went. I like Zelensky personally, he is good, but personally I don't care. You have a leadership in Ukraine that allowed the war to continue. So this is the first part. Another statement at the same time, he is not against the introduction of European troops into Ukraine, but there will be no American ones. The Russians did not want to destroy Kyiv. If they wanted, they would have done it. Russia is capable of very quickly destroying Ukrainian cities by 100%, including Kyiv, but does not want to do it. I can meet with Putin before the end of the month. There is more destruction in Ukraine than in Gaza, but the Russians are attacking Ukraine only by 20%, not 100%. Where have you been for 3 years? Trump asked, addressing those who are unhappy with the lack of an invitation to negotiations. So as you can see, during the first parts of the statements, Trump was very aggressive, but telling the truth, nobody expected that the second part of his statements would be much more aggressive than everything he stated during these hours, during the early morning of Ukrainian time. So after these statements, of course, Zelensky was very upset. He was very upset and he was very angry. He was angry because Trump told that he has just 4% of support of Ukrainians, and this is probably the biggest mistake that Trump made, because Zelensky is an unstable person, and after he heard about this 4%, he started creating his own theory and his own reality. I'm the president of Ukraine because 73% of the people voted for me, and because I'm supported by the majority in my country. In any case, we must be patient, preserve and the state and our sovereignty. We will not sign anything just like that to loud applause. And it has been since the Normandy format in June of 2024. In 2014, there were France, Germany, Russia and me, then still very young and inexperienced. However, they failed to force me to sign the relevant papers. On the contrary, I still pushed through the changes. So also today Zelensky stated that according to his information, 57% trust him. And you know that there is a very big gap between 57% that voted for him or elected him as a president, with just 57% trusted him. Completely different situation, but Zelensky believes that this is enough. Russia wants to get rid of me, if not physically, then politically. I'm a very inconvenient person for Putin, Zelensky stated. Other statements, Ukraine will definitely not win without US support, but Putin will not be able to occupy us. If tomorrow Ukraine is accepted into the European Union and NATO, I will no longer be needed. But until that happens, I will defend my country. Only 1% of Ukrainians support concessions to Russians. The US wanted 50% of what was written in the document on the rare earth metals, but there is not a word about security guarantees. There is nothing clear, and I cannot sell the state. We must be patient, preserve the state and our sovereignty. We will not sign anything just like that to loud applause. Trump has a very close relations with Putin, although I don't think there can be really good relations between the heads of the states, or like Russia and the United States of America. Russia is thinking about taking NATO countries. Could be Lithuania or Poland, so he's talking about Baltic states. So another important statement, that US helps Putin break out of years of isolation with talks in Saudi Arabia. And the most important is that Zelensky is not going to make any elections. He's not going to do anything. This morning some investigation came out with a 57% trust trust in me. So this morning, Trump said that he has just 4% of trust, and several hours later, a very interesting investigation came out with 57% trust to him. So if someone wants to change me right now, it won't work, Zelensky stated. This information about 4% comes from Russia, the president added. It was they who told such information to the Americans, he's saying about Marco Rubio, that's who later transferred this information to Trump himself. So as you can see, Zelensky rejected the demands of the United States of America. He rejected about money, about rare metals, about everything, and the most important, he rejected about the president elections. And after these statements of Zelensky, we got the final part of Trump, and then he was really angry. Think of it, a modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and this is the most important part. The Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. So if you ask me if I would like to ask you a question, what kind of guarantees Donald Trump was talking about? And I'll answer you. This is exactly the things that we were talking about during the previous video. If you remember, I told you that according to my understanding of the situation, somewhere in December, Joe Biden transferred Zelensky from the security and guarantees and protection of CIA security service or something like this, probably to the French security services, or probably to MI6 of secret services of United Kingdom. And this is exactly the guarantees Trump is talking about, because who controls Zelensky, despite the fact that he is either legal president or illegal president? This side controls the resources, this side controls the signature, legal signature or illegal signature of Zelensky. This side will put the final point in this discussion and in this war and in this special military operation. And Trump understand that that was a very, very interesting and very tricky step from Biden. That was something like a last kiss of Biden when he transferred the most important assets of Ukraine. We're talking about the president. It doesn't matter legal or illegal, to the European countries. And now Trump can't do anything with this. He can't force Zelensky to come back under his influence, because if Zelensky was under complete control of CIA agents or Trump himself or the United States of America, of course he would have announced the president elections, probably without even any demands from Trump himself. So this is the guarantees, and the United States of America spent $200 billion. And of course, the only way how to return this money is to cooperate with Russia. And telling the truth, I'm not surprised if in the future we will start receiving updates that the United States of America began supporting Russia in the war with Ukraine. So let's wait and see, of course, what is going to be next. But now let's continue with the statements. So why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization if this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as a separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating at an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. Obviously, Donald Trump today by this statement defeated Zelensky completely. But you know that Zelensky is not the only person. Of course, he has lots of people around him. And when after the statements of Trump, with people from Ukraine, from Ukrainian authorities, the head of intelligence, the second person, Ukrainian Yermak, different politicals from parliament, from everywhere, start publishing lots of updates. Representatives of the Ukrainian government after the yesterday's statements of Trump Trump, with demands for elections and accusations of escalating the war, are publishing a series of uplifting posts. We are continuing to work. We still stand and think. We will continue with our president. Zelensky is the best. Zelensky is all. Zelensky is Ukrainian. Many other different statements made by them, and we see that Zelensky is not a one person. This is a team. And telling the truth, there was another very important statement, and the statement was made by Stefanchuk. I would like to point your attention to this picture, because currently this is the only legal representatives of Ukrainian authorities. He is the speaker, he is the head of Ukrainian parliament, and according to Russia, which means that also according to the United States of America, he is the only legal representative of the Ukrainian authorities. And today he also supported Zelensky by saying Ukraine need bullets, not ballots, when talking about elections. So this is the most important, which means that the special military operation is going to continue. Of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but something tells me that together, the US and Russia can organize another coup in Ukraine with the purpose to force people all over the entire territory of Ukraine to go on streets and to demand elections. As for now, probably the first attempt failed, but let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's discuss the situation in the Sumy direction. You know, today the president of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, also gave his statements regarding the situation in the special military operation, regarding the talks that took place in Saudi Arabia. And during this interview, he made a very important statement. He stated that an hour ago, maybe by the time you're gonna watch this video, it's not going to be like an hour ago, maybe 12 or 24 hours ago, but according to him, the Russians managed to cross the Sumy border, the border with Ukraine, and to go as deep as possible in the territory of Ukraine. He didn't give us coordinates. Vladimir Putin didn't tell us exactly where the Russians crossed the border, but that was obviously very interesting, because everybody started guessing where exactly the Russians attacked the Ukrainians, where exactly the Russians crossed the border. And you know that several military experts stated and came to the conclusion that most likely the Russians crossed the border in Sumy area with the purpose to attack N07 road between the city of Sumy itself and the Sudzha. So let's discuss this in details. And according once again to most of the military experts, after the fall of the settlement of Sverdlikova, and I'll remind you that very heavy clashes have been taking place for the settlement probably since the beginning of February or since the beginning of late January. And yesterday, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, these days the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, confirmed that as a result of clashes, the settlement of Sverdlikov was captured and secured by the Russians completely, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back further in the direction of the settlement of Lebedevka and the city of Sudzha. And now the Russians are located between two rivers. This is very important. For example, this is the first river that goes from the settlement of Nikolaeva Darina, then Zhuravka, then Bilovody, then further in the direction of Novosich. So this is the first river, and this is the river by the name of Snagast. The second river where the Russians are located is between two rivers. It goes from the settlement of Sverdlikova. This is the river. Let's add the river to map. Then the village of Novinka, then the village of Basovka, Loknya, Yunakievka, and that's it. So as you can see, the Russians are located between two rivers, and the Russians have all chances, and according to most of pro-Russian and neutral, let's say, experts, the Russians today cross the border exactly in this area with the purpose to attack the settlements of Yunakievka. Not just this settlement, of course, the Russians will try to move step by step by taking under control first the village of Novinka, then the village of Basovka, and then on land to attack the village of Yunakievka. If the Russians somehow are able to take under control all these territories, then the Russians will be able to cut the main supply arteria that Ukrainians use to support their forces from the city of Sumy towards the city of Sudzha. Let's take a look at this supply line once again. So this is it. The line goes from Sumy then to Stetskovka, then from the settlement of Stetskovka to the settlement of Pisarevka, then to Marina, then to the north north in the direction of Yunakivka, and then through the village of Yunakivka in the direction of Suja. And if the Russians are able to break through these defense belts to defeat the Ukrainians and to take under control at least several villages in this area, this will force the Ukrainians to fall back, and the Russians will be able to establish physical control. And this is going to be the beginning of disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine that would be caught in cold on the territory of the Suja. Of course, the Ukrainians most likely will try to supply their forces with additional roads through the fields, through the surface, through these areas, through these fields, through this unmanned territory. But the Russians, according to information we have, are about to start another offensive operation in this area, and this exactly approximately the road that the Russians are going to use. For example, today we got geolocation from this area that was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video we can see a temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Russian Federation that was attacked by the French-made aviation bomb Hammer. Most likely as a result of this attack, probably the building was damaged anyway. This video, the main value of this video is to understand where exactly the edge Russian positions are located. Based on this video, we have adjusted this part of the map. So we see that the Russians indeed have a temporary deployment point and a foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Psol. And most likely the Russians will advance in this area with the purpose to meet the forces that currently advancing in the direction of Yunakivka, and the Russians will do the same for the settlement of Pokrovsk, Guyeva. So I'm not saying that this offensive operation will take place 1, 2, 3 days and the Russians will do everything they want, but obviously this is the beginning, and most likely in weeks, in months, or maybe in 2 months we are going to see completely different picture in this area. So of course, once again, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk direction. According to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours haven't finished anything, haven't done anything in the Dvorechny direction, north in Kupyansk. We have nothing from the central Kupyansk, just one video published by the Russian side. The sources are saying that this video is archived, but this is very important of this video. Here we can see how the Russians were after withdrawing the Ukrainian soldiers in the northern part of the settlement by the name of Zagryzovo. Based on this video, we have adjusted the northern part of the settlement. This territory used to be considered as a contested area or the gray zone. Now we have no doubts that reports that the Russians managed to take this territory under complete control that we got several, let's say, months ago or weeks ago were just speculations. The Ukrainians still have strong control over this territory. Now let's move further. As for the southern Kupyansk or the Liman direction, during the first 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement of Novolyubovka, and the most important, the Russians managed to secure the settlement of Yampolovka. This information was provided us yesterday by the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, and according to information we have, the Russians managed to secure the forest between the settlement of Yampolovka and these fields. So we are talking about this pocket. As for now, we don't have any geolocation that can confirm this, but we have already adjusted the map as if the territory is colored with the gray zone or the territory is located in contested area. So let's compare the map. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 18th of February. This is the situation by the end of 19th of February. Also, the information that the Russians managed to cut and color the Ukrainians in the forest was confirmed by neutral mappers. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we received a lot of geolocations. Something is happening here. We are not saying that the Russians are about to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in this area, but the Russians are preparing themselves before another wave of attack. The Russians made a lot of attempts, have made a lot of attempts to attack these territories since the beginning of the special military operation, but most of those attacks failed. The Ukrainians repelled almost every single one. Just during the previous several months, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the eastern part of Verkhnykamensk. Most likely the Russians took under control the biggest elevation in this area. We are talking about Bilagora, and most likely the Russians finished the battle for Bilagorovka. And as for now, the Russians are about to begin another attempt to attack in the direction of the city of Siversk. The Russians have already launched several attacks in the direction of Vasyukhovka using the motorcycles and using the squads of Sons of Anarchy, but these squads were defeated by the Ukrainians as a result of artillery strikes and several FPV drone attacks. Anyway, we see that the actions, the activities are intensifying from the Russian side. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, the city of Toretsk, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, but there are several changes on the ground in Ukrainian favor. As for the northern part of the city of Chasiv Yar, we got geolocation published by the Russian side of how they were attacking the Ukrainian units in the most northwestern part of the settlement. Based on this video, based on the weather, based on the snow, based on this winter, based on the weather, we have adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor, because most likely this is very fresh video that took place maybe several days ago. So obviously we can say that the area in the vicinity of the cemetery in the northwestern part of the city is under complete Ukrainian control. As for the city of Toretsk, according to information we have, the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks in the city, in the village of Sherbinivka, and as a result of Ukrainian counterattacks, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the central and over the eastern part of the settlement. Based on the report of natural mappers, we have adjusted the map. Another important updates are coming from the area of N32 road. Once again, according to pro-Ukrainian sources and according to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this intersection of roads. And this is very important because now we see the whole picture. We've been talking a lot about the Konstantinovka direction for the previous several days, and we were talking that the Russians most likely are going to advance along N32 road, let's say in this area, and the Russians most likely will attack from the city of Toretsk towards the Kleban-Bytsky water reservoir. And the Russians basically were doing everything to success these attacks, but now we see that Ukrainians counterattacked exactly in these areas. The Ukrainians managed to restore control over the central part of Sherbinovka, and the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this intersection of roads, which means that the Ukrainians realized and managed to discover the Russian plans, what exactly they're planning to do, and now the Ukrainians are doing everything they can with the purpose to slow down the Russians and to restore control over the strategical positions. So we see that something big is going to happen here as well. As for the Pokrovsk direction, after the Russians managed to restore control over the settlement of Pishchane, and after the Russians managed to destroy the main logistic bridge in this area that Ukrainians used to use for counterattacks towards the Russian positions, we're talking about this bridge. Let's take a look at the video again. The Ukrainians lost their flexibility. Now it's not so easy thing for the Ukrainians to create another counterattack, to carry out another counterattack, because they need to use secondary roads, fields for this, and everything of course is under complete Russian control. So that's why we see something like reduction of Ukrainian activities in this area. And when the Russians finish the security process, securing the settlement of Pishchane, which means that the Russians finish the securing of the main supply roads, they intensify their activities along the railways between the settlement of Udachne and the settlement of Kotlina. And today we start receiving updates from different mappers that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to restore control over the settlement of Kotlina completely. The Russians took under control the mine administration complex and several positions along the tree lines along the railways. Now let's discuss the situation in the Andreevka fortified area, or the Bogatyr direction. The direction is called under the name of the settlement, which is basically the final point of destination of the armored forces of Russian Federation in this area. As you can see, we have lots of icons, we have lots of updates. First, let's talk about the settlement of Ulakli. No, first let's talk about the situation. The thing is very difficult and very critical. It's completely disaster for the Ukrainians, because obviously, according to most of the sources, the Ukrainians were caught in cauldron in this area because the Russians established complete physical control over the main supply roads. We're talking about the N15 road that goes from the settlement of Bogatyr towards Constantinople and then towards the settlement of Ulakli. This road is under complete Ukrainian Russian control. Most likely during this upcoming night, the Ukrainians are planning to counterattack in this area with the purpose to unblock the Ukrainians from, let's say, to unblock this road, to restore control over the southern part, but obviously not to counterattack and to restore everything in the vicinity of Kurakhove. Now the Ukrainians have just one purpose, just one task: to unblock the road and to allow the Ukrainians that's stuck in the area of Ulakli and Constantinople itself to evacuate themselves. So this upcoming night is going to be something like security, let's say, rescue operation. But I'm not sure that the Ukrainians are able to complete this rescue operation successfully, not because the Ukrainians don't have a weapon or something like this. Basically, the Ukrainians don't have soldiers who can do this. I'm talking about, let's say, the understanding that they can carry out and complete this mission. Everybody exhausted, everybody is tired. As for the settlement of Andreevka, today, according to different sources, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, according to neutral mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Andreevka. Furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the settlement, and now the Russians began cutting these pockets between the settlement of Seribne and the settlement of Andreevka. We are talking about these numerous fields and something like this. So this territory is the next primary target for the Russians. They need to maintain the lines, they need to shorten the lines, and then they will be able to continue advancing further in the direction of the border with the Dnipro region. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of Velika Novoselovka, and we see that the lines of the armored forces of Ukraine collapse. Ukrainians can't do anything to slow down the Russians. We see that the Russians face no resistance from the Ukrainian side. Tens of vehicles and infantry are moving through these fields, through these tree lines towards the Ukrainian positions without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side. In this video we can see another Russian attack towards the Ukrainian positions in the area of Novoselka. In this video basically we can see two tanks and two infantry fighting vehicles with marines on board. The Russians landed in this area and took the village under complete control without once again any resistance from the Ukrainian side. Based on this video we have adjusted the map. This is exactly the place, exactly the moment when the Russians landed infantry and Russian vehicle managed to reach this point. Based on this video we have adjusted the southwestern part of the village. We still haven't adjusted the northern part, but still in the truth most of the mappers like pro-Ukrainian and neutral have adjusted these territories under Russian control. So the next target for the Russians is the settlements of Vilna Pole, Privilna, Burlatsky and Shevchenka, and most likely the battle for these territories are going to start right after the Russians finish the battle for this company's stronghold. But telling the truth, some sources have already adjusted these territories in Russian favor, because we start receiving reports from pro-Russian resources that this stronghold was captured and secured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. If this information is correct, we will adjust the map, of course. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing in the northeastern flank, and today, according to information we have, the Russians established control over 40 or 30% of the settlement of Nova Cheritovata. If the settlement falls, then the Russians will attack in the direction of Burlatska and the settlement Besyola and Skudne. So we see that the situation in this area is also very critical for the Ukrainians, and I'm not even sure how exactly the Ukrainians are planning to stabilize the situation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.